Hey everyone, I'm N.O.B.S, and this is part 2 in a little mini series I'm doing about how to get the best sound out of whatever audio system you have. Now real quick, for anyone that's a subscriber or has been waiting on this video, I want to say that I am sincerely sorry. I meant to have this video up much sooner. I recorded the whole thing before I went out of town. Then when I sat down to edit it, I saw that the first shot was totally out of focus, so I'm just having to re-record it now. With that out of the way, if you watched part 1 of this series, I talked a lot about amplifiers and kind of the first steps that you're going to need to take before you start assembling your audio system. In this video, I wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk more about everything else. The way that you set up your speakers in a room can have a huge impact on how good they sound, and it's basically free, so it's really important and really impactful that you get this stuff right. If you're still dipping your toes in and you don't really understand what I'm talking about, I might recommend that you go back and watch part 1. But if you already have an amplifier and even some bookshelf speakers right now, then this is a great place to start and make sure you're optimizing your system for the best performance. Without further ado, let's talk about how to get the best sound out of your speakers. Now, something I want to address right up front is that the room that you choose to set up your speakers in can make a really big difference in terms of the sound quality you can get. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because frankly most of us don't have a bunch of extra rooms laying around that we could choose to set up a listening room or home theater. We can't all be waxing poetic about room acoustics.
This has exquisite mouthfeel.
But with that said, know that the room that you set up in can make a pretty big impact on your sound. Things like rooms that are really small, really big, or rooms that have different angles cut in the walls can introduce some problematic acoustics. Now, the good news is that this stuff can be fixed with things like room treatment and room EQ, which is really a rabbit hole that I might make a video on in the future. Maybe that's its own topic. What I do want to try and encourage you to do is maybe think a little bit outside of the box. You can consider things like setting up a listening room in your master bedroom. That way you're not eating up into other rooms and you have excellent sound when you go to sleep every night. It can also be really advantageous to use a projector that isn't always set up and running. So if you do this, you can have more of a multi-purpose room and then set up the projector when you want to watch movies, have your speakers already out, and then stow the projector away when you want to use the room for other stuff. So it's a good idea to just consider some of those out-of-the-box solutions so that you can still have excellent audio without necessarily having to commit a whole room to that. Now, with all of that said, it's a good idea to start thinking about what you want to do with the speakers once you actually get them in a room. Not just in terms of where you want to put them in a room, but also what kind of mounting options you want for them. Now, there's a few different options out there, everything from speaker stands to wall mounting or even placing them on existing furniture. This is a deeper topic, but the long and the short of it is, if speaker stands like this are an option, you really shouldn't consider anything else. These are going to give you more flexibility with speaker placement, which is really important. They're also going to help avoid some annoying acoustic problems, and they'll even make it easier to swap out speakers if you ever want to do that later. If you decide to go with speaker stands like this, I recommend keeping two main things in mind. Number one is make sure that you get something that allows the speakers to sit at a similar height to your ears when you're sitting down. You want your speakers to be around the height of your ears when you're sitting down. That's really going to help out with audio clarity, especially in the higher frequencies. The other thing that I recommend keeping in mind is trying to go with more of a solid option like this. So this is a solid piece of wood. Doesn't need to be anything super fancy, and there are adjustable stands out there that can look like a really attractive option, but they're just not as stable and they can negatively impact sound quality because they're just not as secure and solid. Adjustable stands are also a little more prone to being bumped and knock over the entire speaker, which is obviously not ideal, so it's worth it to just spend a little bit more up front. There's plenty of good options for these at $100 or less. Feel free to get whatever suits your preferences and meets the other two needs that I mentioned, and have a nice day. If you keep those two principles in mind, there's a lot of different speaker stands out there that you can get for a reasonable price, under $100 or maybe just a little over for some more stylized artistic options. Now, if speaker stands don't suit your needs or the aesthetic goals that you have for a room, then you can consider getting floor standing speakers. This is a taller speaker that is meant to be put directly on the floor. You don't need any other kind of stand. This can be a really good option because then you don't have to look for stands that match your room. You can just pick the speakers that you like and then use those without anything else. The downside of floor standing speakers is that you are going to get worse sound quality for the money that you're paying. Floor standing speakers don't necessarily sound worse, but they are gonna cost a lot more. They might have a little bit more volume and a little bit better bass, but it's not enough to justify the extra cost increase. The big thing is that you're paying for a lot more materials. Usually there's additional drivers, more wood used in the construction, and it's just not an excellent trade-off. That's why a lot of audiophiles prefer using bookshelf speakers, but if you like the look of a floor standing speaker and the extra cost doesn't bother you, then they could be a great option. Some other options that you can go for if you don't like floor standing speakers or speaker stands is considering wall mounting. You want to make sure that you have a little bit of distance from the wall, not so that they're right up against it. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment. But this could be a really good way to kind of cut down on extra components, free up some floor space, and make sure that you still have a good setup. The last option that you can do is simply put speakers on your existing furniture. If you're going to put your speakers on existing furniture, you want to make sure that it's a stable surface that's not going to wobble around. You also want to make sure that you're able to pull the speakers out a little bit from the wall. And ironically enough, you actually don't want to put bookshelf speakers in a bookshelf. That will create a lot of unwanted reflections and really distort how speakers are supposed to sound. It's not a good experience. So make sure that they're not fully enclosed in whatever you're going to put your speakers in. So just to reiterate, speaker stands are going to be the best for a variety of reasons, but if you're not able or not willing to go that route, then there are still some good options to set up speakers in your room to get really good sound quality. I just wanted to take a quick moment to walk you through just like a crash course for speaker setup. So there's really just three main things that you should focus on and try and get right. We're using a very bad sketch here, and this is just going to be kind of a top-down view as if you were, say, looking through the roof of whatever room you're going to put speakers in. First thing that you want to sort out is figuring out the center point of your room. So you can do this really easily by just taking a measuring tape, measuring the length, and then cutting that number in half. And that is going to be your center point, which we'll kind of see as this invisible line. You want to put your speakers so that they are kind of a mirror image from that center point. Another way of thinking about this is that you want your speakers to have the same distance from either wall. So you have 38 inches between this left wall here and 38 inches between the right wall here. The next thing that you want to make sure that you have sorted out, this is a really common mistake that I see people do with speakers, is that you don't want your speakers to be pushed right up against the back wall. That is not going to be the best place for them to be. You can run into issues with bass buildup and stuff like that and just won't sound their best. What you actually want to do is take about 8 inches away from the wall. If you can go more than that, that's awesome, but 8 inches is kind of a good target where you'll start to see some pretty good benefits. If you're doing a listening room and you have the space, it's really good to play around with the position that this is going to be. So if you can get even like 2 or 3 feet away from that back wall, you'll see some really big improvements in terms of imaging, more of a sense of space. I've done this before and it's a pretty amazing difference. So it requires more space, but if you're able to do that, it can be really, really good benefit. The next thing that we want to do is think about your seating position. So wherever you're going to be sitting in the room, you want to take the measurement between these two speakers, and you want your distance from each speaker to be about the same number as the distance from the speakers themselves. So we're kind of going for this equilateral triangle. If you do all of that, you're going to have a much better listening experience. You're going to hear clearer bass, more of a sense of space, more precise imaging of where things are actually going on, and it's a really big improvement. You can spend a lot of time kind of dialing this in, and you don't need to get everything totally perfect. You can kind of mess with these numbers a little bit, do things like if you want to push your speaker speakers a little bit further out to the sides or closer together. It's worth just spending the time kind of messing around and seeing what your preferences are. One last thing that I want to cover is just another thing that you can play with for your speakers. So I'm just going to go ahead and create another little box here. And what you can do when you have your speakers set up, after everything is kind of dialed in, what you can experiment with is if you find that you want a little bit more treble out of your speakers, a little bit more of that high frequency, you can actually go ahead and angle the speakers more so they're facing you, kind of pointing towards you. So a little bit something like that. And the inverse also applies too. So if you find that you have your speakers set up and there's a little bit too much sharp treble, it's a little bit piercing, that could be pretty uncomfortable depending on how sensitive your hearing is and the speakers and all sorts of things like that. You can also go ahead and rotate the speakers the other way to have them angled in a different direction so they're kind of facing away from you, and that will help kind of dial down that treble. So this is a really good tip for kind of making sure that everything is set up just the way that you wanted it. All of these little things that you tweak can make a huge difference to the sound quality.
Now, wall-mounted speakers can be a really good option if you're a little tight on space or you just want a more clean setup overall. If you do decide to go for a wall mount solution for your speakers, I'd recommend that you pull these a little further away from the wall, just like we talked about earlier. For some complicated acoustic reasons, any speaker that is wall-mounted is going to have more bass. And even if you like bass, that's not really what you want. This isn't just like a thunderous, powerful bass that you'd want like from a subwoofer. This is gonna be more of a muddy bass that's just gonna kind of overtake the rest of the music, and you don't really want that. So once again, make sure that you try and get at least 8 inches away from the wall, and more than that is even better. These particular speaker mounts are some that I actually designed and made myself, but there's tons of good options on Amazon. Just make sure that you get some that you can take a little bit further out from the wall. And also be aware that whenever you do drill them in and mount them, that's where they're going to live forever unless you want to patch some holes down the line. I also wanted to make a quick note regarding in-ceiling speakers. In-ceiling speakers can be a really good option for cutting down on wires and preserving the existing look of the room that you're in, but I really strongly recommend against using them for the front, left, center, and right speakers. Essentially, even good quality in-ceiling speakers are just not going to sound anywhere near as good as a pair of bookshelf speakers. They can be a really good choice to add rear or side speakers to a room to add that extra bit of depth, but they're not going to have the clarity and pleasing sound that you're going to want, especially if you're going to drop down some serious bunnies for speakers and pay for somebody to install them. Which, by the way, I do recommend that you pay somebody to install these unless you're really comfortable with cutting holes in drywall, patching it up to look reasonably nice, running cables, and then attaching that in a way that's not going to be super annoying down the line. Now, hopefully, all of this information has been some good thoughts to chew on as you're putting together a home theater system, or even how you might want to adjust your existing home theater. Honestly, guys, if you haven't tried playing around with the placement of your speakers, I think you'll be pretty shocked at how much of a difference that can make. For more tips, tricks, and guides on how to get great audio without having to spend a ton of money, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. I'm N.O.B.S, and I'll see you very soon.